Chapter 8. The Secret Mission in Africa. Fidel Castro supported Che's recommendations about providing Cuban support to the rebels in the Congo, later called Zaire, other liberation movements, and the new leftist governments in Africa. According to Castro, the rebels in the eastern Congo requested Cuban military assistance in 1964. In a 1987 interview with the Italian journalist Gianni Minna, Deutschmann 1994, 118, which took place on the 20th anniversary of Che's death, Castro said the following about Che's involvement in the Congo. At the time, white mercenaries had intervened in the former Belgian Congo, now Zaire. President Lumumba had been killed, a neo-colonial regime was established, and a movement of armed struggle emerged in Zaire. We never made this public, but the revolutionary movement asked us for help, and we sent instructors and combatants on an internationalist mission. He also told Minna it was his idea that Che go with the Cuban force sent to the eastern Congo. In this regard, he said, 132 CheGuevara I myself suggested the idea to Che. He had time on his hands. He had to wait before the conditions were more favorable for his long-hoped-for mission to South America. So we put him in charge of the group that was going to help the revolutionaries in what is today Zaire. In all, about 100 Cubans went and stayed there several months. He followed the approach of teaching Zairians how to fight GHT. Cuban and Zairian patriots fought white mercenaries and the forces sent by the government. In the end, the revolutionary leaders of the former Belgian colony decided to halt the struggle, and our personnel were withdrawn. As Che's wife, Aleda March, wrote in the foreword to his Congo diary, Che, together with the group he led, aimed to strengthen as much as possible the liberation movement in the Congo, to achieve a united front, to select the best men and those prepared to continue the struggle for the final liberation of Africa. Guevara 2000, Roman 45. And according to Che's second-in-command in the Congo, Victor Emilio Drake, Che decided to participate in the Congo project after his African trip, even though this project went against his original idea of going to fight GHT in Argentina. Page Roman 24. I suppose Che decided to participate in the project after his African trip. It went against his original idea to go to fight GHT in Argentina. The assassination of Lumumba and the general situation in the Congo led him to take an interest in the guerrilla struggle there. It enabled him to follow a double objective: to prepare a group for Latin America and to create a third front against imperialism in Vietnam, Latin America, and Africa. These were the ideas he wished to bring to fruition. Africa seemed easier than Latin America. The moment had come to act in Africa. Moreover, according to Pablo Rivalda, the Cuban ambassador in Tanzania who assisted Che's Congo mission, Che saw the Congo as a good site for a training base for liberation movements that would revolutionize all the African countries, and in particular, bring down the infamous white supremacist regime in South Africa. The Secret Mission in Africa, 133, despite the rumors at the time, Che's disagreement with Castro regarding Cuba's relationship with the Soviet Union was not the reason for his departure from Cuba, and this disagreement did not end the long-standing friendship between them. Nor did Cuba's relationship with the Soviet Union lead Castro to abandon his desire to see Cuba play an active role in the international struggle against U.S. and European imperialism. Castro was quite willing to send a contingent of Cubans, headed by Che, to assist the left-wing rebels in the Congo, who were then GHTing against the pro-Western regime of Prime Minister Moise Tshom. The Congo became the scene of a bloody civil war following its independence from Belgium in 1960. The country's FARST elected prime minister, Patrice Lumumba, was overthrown and then murdered by a U.S.-backed coup d'etat in December 1960, when Tshom, who was involved in Lumumba's assassination, subsequently became the country's head of state in 1964 with U.S. support. Lumumba's followers launched an armed uprising against him. In November 1964, with the intent of crushing this uprising, the U.S. government provided planes to transport Belgian troops and white mercenaries to the Congo. Because of the Cold War conflict at the time between the United States and its allies and the Soviet Union and its allies, the situation in the Congo became a major international political crisis. In December 1964, Fidel Castro sent Che to represent Cuba at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. In the well-publicized speech he gave at the General Assembly, Che denounced the involvement of the U.S. government and its allies in the Congo and other parts of Africa. Deutschmann, 1997, 286-88. In this speech, Che reminded the members of the General Assembly that Lumumba was murdered following the occupation of the country by a United Nations force that Lumumba had requested. He said this force had allowed his opponents to capture and kill Lumumba with impunity. He claimed the United States and other Western imperialist countries used the United Nations to depose Lumumba and kill Thou Sands of Congolese. And their purpose was to defend the superiority of the white race in Africa and to continue Western imperialist control over the Congo's vast mineral resources. And if this was not enough, he said, the latest acts have led the world with indignation because 134 CheGuevara they allowed one of Lumumba's murderers, Tsham, to come to power illegally with the help of Belgian paratroopers, carried by U.S. planes who took off from British bases. Deutschmann, 287. Che went on to state, our free eyes open now on new horizons and can see what yesterday, in our condition as colonial slaves, we could not observe, namely, that so-called Western civilization uses a showy facade to disguise an ugly picture of hyenas and jackals. He ended his comments on the Congo crisis by saying, all free men of the world must be prepared to avenge the crime of the Congo. Only a few months later, in April 1965, Che led a secret contingent of 100 Cuban volunteers to assist the Congolese rebels, who were fighting both the Tsham regime and what they considered its Western imperialist backers. The idea of going to the Congo to assist the leftist rebels fighting the neo-colonial regime there appealed to Che largely, because of his fascination with the idea of linking the nations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America together in a common struggle against Western imperialism. And despite the lack of enthusiasm for the idea among many of the African leaders he met on his trip to Africa, Che wanted to establish a Cuban-led military training center in the eastern Congo. He hoped revolutionaries from all over the African continent would come to this base to train and gain valuable fighting skills and experience that they would then take back to their respective countries. Anderson, 623. To prepare for the Congo expedition, Che removed himself from public view at the end of March 1965. By the end of April, his disappearance from public view had begun to cause a great deal of speculation, both inside and outside Cuba, about what had happened to him. On April 30, Fidel Castro was interviewed by a number of reporters, and in response to their questions about Che, he answered that he could say only that Che would always be where he could be of most use to the revolution. This statement, however, only served to intensify the speculation and rumors about Che's disappearance. Che wrote a confidential and rather personal letter of resignation to Castro when he left for the Congo. This letter, Jeresi 1968, A. 410-11, which Castro made public in October 1965, appears to have been designed among other purposes to absolve the Cuban government of all the secret mission in Africa, 135, responsibility for Che's actions in the Congo in the event he was discovered, captured, or killed there. Fidel, I remember at this hour many things, when we met at Maria Antonia's house in Mexico, when you suggested that I come to Cuba, and the tension of the last-minute preparations. One day they came around asking who to advise in case of death, and its real possibility struck us all. Afterward, we knew that it was certain, that in a revolution you die or triumph, if the revolution is a true one. Many of our comrades were left behind on the long road to victory. Today everything has a less dramatic tone because we are all more mature, but the same thing is repeating itself. I feel I have completed that part of my duty that has tied me to the Cuban Revolution, and so I say goodbye to you, our comrades, and to your people, who are now mine too. I formally renounce my post in the directorate of the party, my post as minister, my rank of comandante, and my status as a Cuban. There is nothing legal that ties me to Cuba, only ties of another type that cannot be broken, as in the case of CES. Making a summary of my past life, I think that I have worked with sufficient honesty and dedication to consolidate the success of the revolution. My only fault of any gravity is that I did not confide in you at the beginning in the Sierra Maestra, and have not understood with sufficient clarity your qualities as a leader and revolutionary. I have lived magnificent days at your side, and I have felt the pride of belonging to our people in the dark and bright days of the Caribbean crisis Bay of Pigs invasion by US-backed Cuban exiles. Rarely has a statesman shone as brightly as you in those days. I feel proud of having followed you without hesitation, identifying myself with your way of thinking, seeing and appreciating both the dangers and principles. Other lands of the world now claim the assistance of my modest efforts. I can do what you now are prevented from doing because of your responsibility at the helm of Cuba, and so the time has come to separate. Let it be known that I do this both in pleasure and sorrow. Here I leave the purest of my 136 CheGuevara hopes as a builder and the most cherished of my loved ones, and I leave a people who admitted me as one of their sons. This lacerates part of my spirit. To new fields of battle I will take the faith that you have given me, the revolutionary spirit of my people, and the feeling of carrying out the most sacred of duties. To fight against imperialism wherever it exists. This comforts and cures my pain abundantly. Once again, I say that I free Cuba of all responsibility, except that which comes from her example. If my last hour should come under other skies, my last thought will be for the Cuban people, and especially for you. I am grateful for your teaching and example, and I will be faithful to you until my last act. I have always identified myself with the foreign policies of our revolution, and will continue to do so. Wherever I go, I will feel the responsibility of being a Cuban revolutionary, and I will act as one. I leave nothing material to my wife and children, and this doesn't bother me, for I am happy that it is this way. I ask nothing for them, since the state will provide them enough to live and will educate them. There are many things I could tell you and our people, but I feel that this is not necessary. Words cannot express what I want to say, and it is not worthwhile to fight sheets of paper. Victory always, country or death, my embrace with all revolutionary fervor. When Che left for the Congo in April 1965, he led a hand-picked group of mostly black Cubans who had fought with him and Castro in the Sierra Maestra. Their clandestine mission was carefully planned by Cuban intelligence, which planted a false report in the Dominican Republic that Che had arrived in the capital of Santo Domingo in April and had been killed shortly thereafter in the civil war going on in that country at the time, Anderson 1997, 638. Thus, while the CIA was looking for evidence of Che's presence in the Dominican Republic, he and his companions were able to leave Cuba, travel to Africa, and enter the Congo with complete secrecy. Che's reasons for leaving Cuba in 1965 to go fight GHT in the Congo, and later in 1966 to establish a guerrilla training base in Bolivia, were twofold. He felt his mission in life was to carry out the struggle for the liberation, the secret mission in Africa, 137 of Latin America, and the rest of the Third World from imperialist domination and capitalist exploitation. Moreover, he felt he would soon be too old to be able to physically carry out this kind of mission. Furthermore, to carry out this kind of mission, he needed the freedom of action that he could gain only if he was no longer a high-profile official in the Cuban government. His official responsibilities required him to speak in the name of this government and to act in accordance with its policies and diplomatic relations. Tabo 530. He felt it was necessary to free himself from the constraints imposed on him by his official obligations as an important leader in the Cuban government, so that he could return to the life of a revolutionary guerrilla and carry out the global struggle against Western imperialism, which he had come to consider his main mission in life. His total commitment to his convictions in this regard, and the feeling that time was running out on his ability to fulfill his mission, were his reasons for leaving Cuba in 1965. According to Fidel Castro, he knew Che had wanted to go to fight GHT in South America for many years, since the time Che joined the Cuban revolutionary movement in Mexico. In fact, Che told Castro then that once the Cuban Revolution triumphed, he wanted to be free to go fight GHT in Argentina. Castro revealed this in his 1987 interview with the Italian journalist Gianni Minna, Deutschman 1994. 116. Che very much wanted to go to South America. This was an old idea of his, because when he joined us in Mexico, he did ask one thing: the only thing I want after the victory of the revolution is to go fight GHT in Argentina, his country, that you don't keep me from doing so, that no reasons of state will stand in the way. And I promised him that. It was a long way off, after all. Firstly, no one knew if we would win the war or who was going to be alive at the end. And he surely, because of his impetuousness, had little chance of coming out alive. Once in a while, in the Sierra and afterward, he would remind me of this plan and promise. He was certainly farsighted in this. After the success of the Cuban Revolution, Castro said Che grew more enthusiastic about the idea of making a revolution in South America. 138 CheGuevara. And as the years went by, he became increasingly impatient to carry out his desire to play an important role in this historic struggle. Che's African diary. Che realized shortly after arriving in the Congo that the rebels could not win because of their corrupt and weak leaders, their failure to organize support among the local population, their distrust of one another, and their hopeless lack of discipline. In this regard, it is relevant to note the following observation he made in what has become known as his Congo Diary, Guevara 2235. The leaders of the movement pass most of their time outside of the territory. Organizational work is almost null due to the fact that the mid-level leaders do not work. In fact, they do not know how to work, and everyone distrusts everyone else. Lack of discipline and lack of self-sacrifice are the dominant characteristics of the guerrilla troops. Naturally, with these troops one cannot win a war. In Tanzania, after he was forced to leave the Congo, Che wrote a 153-page manuscript about the failure of his Congo mission. Che wrote this account of his Congo experience during his stay in the Cuban embassy in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. During the months he lived there in secrecy. This manuscript, Passages de la Guerra Revolutionaria, Congo, was kept secret for more than 30 years, until it was edited and Fi R.S.D. published in 1999 by his wife Aleda March and Richard Gott. The English translation was published in 2000. CheGuevara 2000, this ruthlessly honest document, reveals among other things that Che decided he would accompany the contingent of armed Cubans sent to the Congo, without Fi R.S.D. informing and obtaining the consent of the Congolese rebel leaders, such as Laurent Kabila. Thus, Che states in this document, I hadn't told any of the Congolese about my decision to fight GHT there. In my Fi R.S.D. conversation with Kabila, I had not been able to do so the secret mission in Africa 139, because nothing had yet been decided. And after the plan was approved by Fidel Castro, it would have been dangerous for my project to be known before I arrived at my destination. There was a lot of hostile territory to cross. I decided, therefore, to present a fait accompli and act according to however they reacted to my présence. I was not unaware of the fact that a negative would place me in a difficult position, because now I couldn't go back, but I calculated that it would be difficult for them to refuse me. Page 10. Although the Congolese rebel leaders did not object to Che's presence as the commander of the Cuban contingent, they were concerned about his presence in the Congo. Moreover, he found it difficult to meet with them, and soon realized there was little prospect for the rebels to achieve victory, since these leaders were ineffective, and their forces were incapable of defeating the existing neocolonial regime, which had the backing of the Belgian, British, and U.S. governments. Che also blamed himself for the failure of the Congo mission. He wrote, I set off with more faith than ever in the guerrilla struggle, yet we failed. My responsibility is great. I shall not forget the defeat nor its most precious lessons. I learned certain things in the Congo. Some mistakes I will never make again, others perhaps I will, and there will be new ones that I shall commit. Guevara 2235. Although he said he continued to have faith in his Foucault theory for creating a popular revolution, he made the following scathing critique of his own actions in the Congo. I was at the head of a group of Cubans, no more than one company strong, and my function was to be their real leader who carried them to the victory that would hasten the development of a genuine popular army. My peculiar situation, however, made of me a soldier representing a foreign power, an instructor of Cubans and Congolese, a strategist, and a high FL Ying politician in an unfamiliar setting. Had I been a more authentic soldier, I might have had more influence in the other spheres of my complicated relationships. I have described how I reached the point of safeguarding the cotter, my own precious person, at particularly disastrous 140 CheGuevara moments in which I found myself, and how I allowed subjective considerations to gain the upper hand in the closing moments. From this passage in his diary, it is clear that Che was deeply critical of his own behavior and the many limitations he confronted in the Congo. He engaged in this self-critique with a view to avoiding repetition in the future of the errors that he felt he had committed in the Congo. However, Che's subsequent mission to Bolivia appears to have failed for some of the same reasons as the Congo mission. For example, in Bolivia, Che repeated the tactic of inserting himself secretly into another country at the head of a foreign military group, and into a situation that lacked both the objective and subjective conditions necessary for a successful revolutionary movement. The legacy of Che's mission in Africa. It is interesting to note that although Che's mission to the Congo was a bitter defeat for him and his Cuban companions, the lessons Cuba's leaders learned from this unsuccessful effort to assist the Congolese rebels helped them to be much more successful in the military and political support they provided to liberation movements and leftist governments throughout Africa during the following decades. Without a doubt, the best example of this success was Cuba's involvement in Angola. Between April 1965, when Che Arresti promised Antonio Agostinho Neto, the leader of the liberation movement, Sting the Portuguese colonial rulers of Angola, that Cuba would assist the liberation struggle in his country, and May 1991, when the last Cuban combatants left Angola, some 450,000 Cubans, 7% of the Cuban population, had served in this war-torn country. Harris 2009. They helped the liberation move, meant gain Angola's independence, and then helped the new government of President Neto defeat 2 South African military interventions and a bloody insurgency backed by the U.S. government. They also helped the Angolan government repulse an invasion from Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in the longest and largest military campaign in Africa since World War II. Cuban support played a key role in Angola's liberation and defense, and in the liberation of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde from Portuguese the secret mission in Africa, 141 colonial domination. And Cuba also helped defend the newly independent government of the Congo Republic, Brazzaville, formerly a French colony, from neo-colonial forces intent on overturning it. They played an important role in the liberation of Mozambique from Portuguese colonial rule, as well as the liberation of the white settler-controlled former British colony of Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. Moreover, the Cuban military victories against the white South African forces in Angola greatly contributed to the liberation of Namibia and to the ultimate downfall of the white supremacist apartheid regime in South Africa itself. This regime was greatly weakened by the demoralizing defeat the combined Cuban, Angolan, and Namibian forces inflicted on the white South African troops in Angola and Namibia. Nelson Mandela, the Arresti president of the new Republic of South Africa, established after the downfall of the racist apartheid regime in that country, is among the many African leaders who have praised the Cubans for the assistance they provided in these struggles for independence. He has repeatedly thanked the Cubans for their contribution to the victory of his people over racist domination and imperialism. For example, at the public opening of the Southern Africa-Cuba Solidarity Conference in 1995, President Mandela, 1995, said, "Cubans came to our region as doctors, teachers, soldiers, agricultural experts, but never as colonizers. They have shared the same trenches with us in the struggle against colonialism, underdevelopment, and apartheid. Hundreds of Cubans have given their lives, literally in a struggle that was, first and foremost, not theirs but ours. As Southern Africans, we salute them. We vow never to forget this unparalleled example of selfless internationalism. At a more individual level, Che's brief presence in the Congo changed dramatically the life of the Congolese teenager, who served as his translator during the months. He and his companions operated in the Fizi Baraka mountain range, near the border between the Congo and Tanzania. Freddie Alanga, who spoke both Swahili and French, had been a newspaper vendor and was just 16 years old when he was assigned by the rebel leadership to serve as Che's translator during the time he and his Cuban comrades carried out their then secret mission of providing 142 CheGuevara support to the Congolese rebels. Freddie Alanga's brief encounter with the legendary Che and his Cuban companions placed him on the path of an incredible journey that took him from being a teenage rebel in the eastern Congo to Cuba, where he studied medicine, married a Cuban woman, and became a brain surgeon. As a young African who saw the whites in his country as racist oppressors, he knew nothing about the Cuban Revolution, and at Phi Resti he considered Che to be a sarcastic white man. Doyle 2004. But he soon came to admire Che. He was particularly impressed with how Che treated the Africans around him with respect. In those days in the Congo, this was something Freddie had never seen. Shortly before Che and his companions pulled out of the Congo, they arranged for Freddie to be sent to Cuba, where he finished his schooling, went to the university to become a doctor, and then specialized in pediatric neurosurgery. Although Freddie never returned to the Congo before he died in Cuba, today in Africa, there are hundreds of Cuban doctors and African doctors who were trained in Cuba. Harris 2009. Ironically, Kabila seized control of the government of the Congo in 1997, at the head of a military force that originated in the same region of the country where Che and his Cuban comrades had established their training base in 1965. Backed by the governments of Rwanda and Uganda, Kabila's forces managed to topple the long-time dictatorial regime of General Mobutu Sese, the U.S.-backed military strongman who had seized power in November 1965. The same month, Che and his men were forced to abandon their mission in the Congo. Kabila was assassinated by a member of his own staff in an unsuccessful coup attempt in 2001, and his son replaced him as the Congolese head of state. Che's secret return to Cuba in 1966. In November 1965, Che left the Congo as secretly as he had entered 7 months earlier. After leaving the Congo, he spent a couple of months in secrecy in the Cuban embassy in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. During this time, Castro gave Che's wife, Aleida, permission to visit him, and she arrived in Tanzania in mid-January 1966, March 2008, 200. For Aleida, this visit was what she had dreamed might happen someday. The secret mission in Africa, 143, enabled them to be completely alone together without their children, and the constant circle of subordinates and comrades that had previously surrounded him in Cuba. During their stay in the Cuban embassy in Dar es Salaam, they slept, ate, read, and conversed in a large dining room that was converted into living quarters for them. During this time, Che went over the notes he had written during his 7 months in the Congo and wrote a lengthy manuscript that was primarily intended as a report for Cuba's top leaders on the failure of his mission and what he had learned about the possibilities for assisting liberation movements and leftist governments in Africa. This manuscript was read by Fidel Castro and a few other key officials of the Cuban government, but kept secret for more than 30 years. As in the case of his Bolivian diary, Aleida March played a central role in its publication. It was published in English with the title The African Dream, The Diaries of the Revolutionary War in the Congo, with the addition of an introduction written by the well-known British journalist and historian Richard Gott, 2000. In Castro's 1987 interview with the Italian journalist mentioned above, he revealed what happened after Che was forced to withdraw from the Congo, Deutschmann 1994, 119. According to Castro, having now spent about 6 months in Zaire, Che stayed for a while in Tanzania, assessing the experience he had just lived through. His conduct on the mission was, as always, exemplary to the highest degree. His stay in Africa was temporary, awaiting the creation of conditions for traveling to South America. But as Castro explained in this interview, Che's situation was now greatly complicated by the fact that during his absence, his resignation letter had been made public by the Cuban government. in response to the growing rumors and outrageous stories circulating about his mysterious disappearance from public view in Cuba. To quote Castro, pages 119-20, "Once the letter had been made public, politically it had become unavoidable to publish it. Che, with his particular character, felt very awkward about returning to Cuba after having said farewell." 144 CheGuevara, "But in the end, I persuaded him to return, because it was the best move given all the practical matters he wanted to take care of. So he secretly returned to Cuba. He stayed several months, training in a remote mountain region, with those who were to accompany him to Bolivia. It was a bitter blow for him to return secretly to Cuba after spending 7 months in the Congo without having anything to show for his efforts, and after having resigned his important positions in the Cuban government. The experience, however, seems to have made Che more determined than ever to undertake a successful revolutionary mission outside of Cuba, but this time in his native South America. Upon his return to Cuba from the Congo, Che found solace in the fact that one of his grandest dreams had come true. An intercontinental organization representing the underdeveloped countries of the world, with its headquarters in Cuba, had been founded only a few months before his return by Fidel Castro. From January 3 to 15, 1966, the FI-RSD Conference of the Organization of Solidarity of Asian, African, and Latin American Peoples, referred to thereafter as the Tricontinental, was held in Havana, with some 400 delegates from the underdeveloped world attending. As it turned out, Che's revolutionary ideas were the central topic of discussion among the delegates, and this undoubtedly reinforced his determination to carry out the realization of one of his old ESD dreams: the liberation of Latin America's oppressed and exploited masses. This dream was bolstered by his belief that Cuba would become truly independent of the Soviet Union only when additional revolutionary governments were established in Latin America that could provide support to Cuba. Che's return to Cuba was never made public. Deutschmann 1994, 119. He remained in hiding during the entire period that he stayed there. Almost immediately after his return, he began to prepare a new mission that he felt would not have the limitations of the abortive undertaking in the Congo. He chose Bolivia as the site for a revolutionary guerrilla FOCO, which he himself would organize and lead. In October 1966, he once again left Cuba, as secretly as he had entered, to begin this undertaking.
Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe.